A constitution must have purpose, and the purpose must be to create a nation that conduces to the greatest happiness of the greatest number of people. That is what a constitution must be. And having set the objective of the constitution, you then frame a constitution to achieve that objective.
Because we really do have a race problem. Those divisions are real. We see it in our politics, we see it in our trade union. We see that they take the divisions with them. Look at where people live in this US. You have enclaves in the Bronx and in Richmond Hill and in Brooklyn. They're taking the division with them.
Women are dying in the streets, and we have a government pontificating running around campaigning for women's vote. No women should vote in this election coming up unless there is something done to the legislation as Magistrate Kim is advocating.
That voices like ours that are not in the political trench fighting it out, voices like ours should become stronger. One of the things about the Caribbean is that we have never had one discourse. Bass will know the days of the New World and the Old World and the radical left and so on. What we had was this concourse of ideas, which I think in the early days of independence pushed us in a certain direction. We've got to move back to that point of having these multiple discourses.
Good evening. From our studios here in New York, I'm Charles Sugrim, and I'll be moderating this program tonight. Over the past 3 weeks or so, we've been talking about constitutional reform. Today, we want to start a series of talk on economic development for our country. With me today are three distinguished sons of Guyana. We have Dr. Professor Taran Khemraj. He's a professor of economics in Florida, one of the top universities in Florida. As you know, Khemraj was one of 4 students who earned the British Scholarship Worldwide, and he read his master's program in Cambridge University in London. Also, we have Salahuddin Nausrudeen. You're talking about a marketing guru, you're talking to Salim. So he has been responsible for the expansion of a lot of companies in Guyana, La Parcan being one of them. And now he's so much involved within the United States with so many entities, it's hard to get Salim sometimes. And last but not least, we have Colin Haynes. Thanks for returning, Colin. You were here last week. Collins, as we know, have a master's degree in public health. He recently completed his master's degree in public administration. So, gentlemen, I want to welcome you to the program tonight.
Thank you.
Good night, Charles. Just one correction. I went to the University of Manchester in the north of England.
Okay, one of the top university. Thanks for correcting us. Okay, gentlemen. Economic well-being, we have heard so much of economic well-being for its citizens. Every government, they're obligated basically to protect the country, protect its citizenry, create an environment where the well-being of the citizens are uplifted. If someone in border market come to you and said, guys, what really is economic development? How would you explain that to them? Salim, you want to start it?
Sure. Thank you and good night, everyone. And it's glad to be on this side of the mic. I'm usually on your side, being the moderator of so many shows on Globespan 24/7. We must give a shout out to Nohar Singh and his team for a fantastic job that they've been doing over the past, 5-6 months in bringing these shows. And there's a host of them, a parade of these shows every night that I think are adding value to Guyanese in Guyana and, of course, in the diaspora, where the discussion about Guyana and Guyana's development and so on is on everyone's thoughts and tongues. So I'm glad to be on this show with you here tonight. In terms of economic development, for me, it's always been about the human side of it. I know economists and guys like Taron will be talking about GDP and numbers and so on, but for me, it has always been is the Guyanese population, or any country, is their population experiencing better health? Can they live freely in their country? Can they easily access finance? Is opportunities available for them? Is education, being spent on in a meaningful way? So for me, economic development would have to see all these numbers raising, not just the GDP or not just the production of certain sectors, but I've got to see the human side of it, the social side of it also raising. And I think in Guyana, in particular, we have seen that these numbers have been used politically over the last few decades, and more importantly, they haven't even been moving. I don't know where these numbers are going. Data in Guyana, as you guys know, statistics in Guyana is very, very hard to come around. So I would say, in terms of my definition of when I hear the word economic development, I want to hear about people's life, and I want to see a driving force behind that. Sadly, in Guyana, there is no driving force behind economic development, whether in its local or global format. In Guyana, we have had consecutive governments who've been trumpeting economic development, but little have we seen in terms of actual human development. And for me, I think it is time that Guyana look much harder for a leader that will bring about economic change and not political change. I think we've had political changes quite too many times in Guyana, and it has not resulted in human development or even economic development. So I think it's time for us to get someone in Guyana, and this time we are looking for leaders. Everybody's out there shopping and trying to, polish themselves to be the best leader. But until and unless we don't have a leader that understands business and that can get things done, we're going to be economic development is just going to be something that will be abstract to all of us.
Thank you, Salim. Great points. Colin, you're in Linden, and you go to the Linden Mackenzie market. Someone asks you, what is economic development? What will you tell that person?
Thank you, Charles. Once again, it's great to be on the show. I want to thank you for putting this together. I also want to thank the organizers for making this a reality. Oftentimes we have shows like these, but I think the greater part of it is the impact that it makes on the Guyanese people, which is to be able to have this discourse. And, talking to one of my friends across the U.S., these discourses are very important. They're important because they'll shape the social, political, and economic outlook of Guyana. Talking about the economy, I would tell someone at the market in Linden that economic development is taking developing economies, emerging economies, young economies, and turning them into advanced economies. And why is it important for us to turn emerging economies into advanced economies is that you get better outcomes. So economic development, in my terminology as a young person, deals really with increasing things like our life expectancy, ensure that we have all the resources to live longer, environmental sustainability, we have a good sanitation, clean water, great healthcare. Healthcare is pretty much the peak of economic development, in my opinion. I'm a healthcare professional, so I'll be biased with that, because what that does is when you have access to great quality healthcare, healthcare that's delivered in the most quickest fashion, it increases life expectancy. It also, the people are the driving force, and if people are not healthy, the economy, they can't go to work, they can't start businesses, they can't take care of their children. Think about mothers who are, for me, I think is very important in development. So when we're talking about economic development, we're talking about how directly we touch the lives of mothers who in turn touch the life of their kids. So we empower them to have sustainable economic development. They have money in their pockets. They have entrepreneurial opportunities. They're well supported by their spouses and families. So I think that economic development also, we talk about housing. Economic development also lies in quality housing. Being able also to have education, that's part of economic development. So, it's a very broad term. But I think that over the last maybe 10 or 20 years with the Millennium Development Goals, now we have the Strategic Development Goals by the United Nations. These are all markers for how we can improve our economy and make life better for our people in Guyana.
Beautifully put. Thank you, Colin. Taryn, being an economist, in addition to what we heard from Salim and Colin, how do we marry economic development with economic progress? Is that something that we can mix the two together, or is it not something that we can marry?
Well, I mean, economic development does imply economic progress, and so the two are go together. So for you to progress economically, there must be development. And I'm not going to repeat what the other guys have said, but I will try to synthesize some of the things. But in general, as we say in economics, you have economic development when the capabilities of people increase, right? That's a broad way of thinking of development. And for people's capabilities and capacity to increase, they must be able to do things freely, right? So part of progress, economic development, progress, is this whole notion of social development as well. I mean, and all this, people talk about GDP and GDP, but it's not true that that economists haven't looked at happiness and all these social indications. I mean, these are old literature, and economics have moved away. I mean, people are studying happiness, but progress means that you have a greater capacity to do things. And how do you have capacity? Well, the first thing that should happen is that your average income, or the average income of the society, should be increasing, right? That's one thing. That's why GDP still matters, and the per capita income. People must be earning a growing income. The problem is that the GDP is not shared equally, right? So that's not progress. And how do we make society more equitable is a very big issue, which I don't think we can cover here tonight. But another thing that should happen, as Colin said, if you're going to have progress, is you need to have a higher life expectancy. You should be living longer, more fulfilling lives. You should be healthier. There should be some level of gender equity. There should be a reduction of inequality in the country. On a place like Guyana, inequality is this, is not just totally inequality. We have to look at the ethnic dynamics and the ethnic issue, for which we don't have any data really to say that. We have more speculative positions on it, and I certainly do have speculative positions on that. So economic development would mean people are happier. People can be free to express themselves, whether in the press. People should be free to go out at nights and not be robbed. That's progress as well. That's economic development. So anything that that restricts people's capability, as Amartya Sen said, means that you're retrogressing, you're not progressing, right? So it's all these things. It's a lot of stuff, but freedom must be a major part of it. The freedom to think, the freedom to express oneself, and as I can't help but getting into politics, but there's a lot of constraints on people's freedom within the main political parties of Guyana. You can't say everything in the list system that will offend the president or the leader of the opposition, or else you would not be promoted. You wouldn't get that minister job or something that everyone seems to want. And all these things, this progress means we're getting over that. and very important for progress. And I'm not going to continue to belabor this point because it's well expressed. Education, there should be an increase in education, and training of people in all fields. We shouldn't just, So yes, that is development means progress. It has to be. Again, the two have to go together.
Wonderful. This guy, your explanation and the three of you have really done an excellent job in saying what economic development is all about. And it's really beautiful. As I agree, it should really be the overall health and the well-being of its citizens, both academic and general population. Life should improve. The quality of life should improve. The standard of living should improve. That comes with economic development. Now, the question is, does the GDP, what we call the gross domestic product, and the GNP, the gross national product, what does that mean for an ordinary person when they hear that the minister or the Bank of Guyana comes to the report and says, we are growing 4.1% this year? What does that mean to the guy who is a clerk at the Ministry of Finance? Taran, we can start with you.
Well, your GDP, it's very important that any society measures what it produces, right? It's a very important thing. We need to know how many ounces of gold we produce per year, how many tons of cane, how many bottles of rum, the number of haircuts, the number of people who went to lessons, school lessons, and so on. These are all production outputs, and they should be measured. If we don't measure these things, we will be shooting in the dark, pretty much, right? So, for all its limitations, we need to measure it, and we do measure it. We have established ways. Of course, the underground economy in Guyana is fairly large, and other parts of the Caribbean as well. So there are some parts that we can't measure, but we can approximate. We don't know the composition. So your GDP is also, you can think of GDP another way. It's also the income of the country in a given year, right? It's all the incomes, because everything produced should generate an income, right? That's the whole idea in that given year. And then there should be a certain amount of consumption and expenditure in the system, right? So you can see the GDP as the gross income of the country. You asked the question of GNP. It's more of a technical issue, but I think it's an important one for analysts who will eventually have to look at Guyana, because the residency of the producer does not matter when we think about GDP, right? So, for example, starting next year and the year after and the next decade, Guyana's GDP will quadruple and get bigger and bigger, largely because of a new foreign oil company producing more oil. But when we think of GNP, we look at Guyanese residents who are actually Guyanese producing, right? Both in Guyana and outside of Guyana. So for example, what's going to happen is that going forward, there will be a big divergence between GDP, because Exxon is not a national company, and the GDP, right? So the GNP will tend to be smaller, the GDP will be much bigger going forward, right? So if we want to measure really what Guyanese are producing and not Exxon plus Guyanese, well, then you should be looking at the GNP going forward.
Okay, thank you, Taran. Before you guys continue the question, we have some comments. And I know that Devin, you put some on the screen, but I have one here from Dr. Rose. He said, economic development is about improving the welfare of the masses, healthcare, education, the creation of jobs, living wages, modern technology, building, improving infrastructure, crime prevention, and freedom in general. In essence, it is improving the happiness of people, prosperity, and progress. This is the definition. I think you guys captured basically most of what Dr. Rose is saying. Colin?
Yeah, I think there couldn't be a better person to sum it up that Dr. Rose. So yeah, the whole idea of um, having economic development is, like Sharon said, is to make people happy. I can recall personally when I went to Europe the last about 2 years ago, um, and I looked to see Edinburgh is one of the more happier places on earth to live, because the people there, they have great jobs, they have good transportation, they have free health care, they're really happy, they have a clean space. Their drinking water is probably the best there is in the world. You know, if you go to Scotland and you buy drinking water, they probably laugh at you because drinking water comes out to the tap. I had that experience. So thinking about that, what it did for me as a young person, it really set the bar for me. It really helped me to think of what we need to do to increase economic opportunities in Guyana. And just to touch on GDP a little bit, for people out there who want to know maybe how is GDP calculated, what is GDP composed of? So GDP goes to me like a formula like this. It's called C plus I plus G plus X. And Professor Taran, you're quite versed in this. So C, it deals with consumption. So people consume in the economy. You know, private citizens, they buy stuff, they use electricity, they use water, and investments happen in the economy, investments to, businesses, healthcare, education, whatever the case may be. And then government also spends, which is the G part of the whole formula. And also it's a product as well of export and import. So the country has to have a way to bring in money through exports, but also the country also spend some of that money when they bring in goods and services that they cannot render. So GDP is a compact formula that really summarizes how the economy is growing, how big it's getting, what is it doing for the people.
Excellent, Colin. I see Professor Khemraj, I see you have competition there. Colin might take your job soon as a professor.
Never.
Well, after that, about the GDP. Yeah. So I think
Salim,
I think Taran and Colin did a fantastic job in defining GDP and its impact and where it comes from. But I think in the Guyana instance and in many underdeveloped countries, I think the numbers that follow, because GDP is the top number, and everybody can report on that, and everybody will use it for their own agenda, so to speak, And in Guyana, we talked about GDP and we talked about 4.1% growth, and but I think as Guyanese, we've got to look at the makeup of that GDP. We got to figure out is that GDP, and that is why I believe we need a more entrepreneurial, a more business type of people in Guyana, so that we can analyze that GDP. What's driving the GDP? Is it growing at over the past 10, 15, 20 years in the direction we needed to go? We need to lose that number down and figure out what's driving that 4%. Maybe that 4% comes from oil, meaning that so many other sectors, and you just mentioned that Colin is from Linden, and there's probably a lot of farmers in Linden who are probably making less money today, who are producing less today, even with a higher GDP. So we've got to be careful how GDP is being used and is being defined and manipulated. More importantly, I think, like I said, it's a top number. So all the numbers below that will affect ultimately the happiness level, the progress that Guyanese families and individuals are making, because the numbers below that will determine where is government spending that money, where is it coming from, and those kind of things. So I think what I'm trying to get at is that we've got to be careful with these blanket
the components
numbers
that make up the GDP,
and go drill deeper down. And I think if you drill deeper down, you'll understand why a vendor in Linden is making less or no money than she's making a year ago. And that story multiplies itself 1,000 times in Guyana across all villages, and it adds up to an economy that's really seeking some kind of lifeline at this moment.
Right, and to add to that, and go back to what the comment that was made earlier by Dr. Rose. What Salim is really getting at, and it relates to one of the terms raised by Dr. Rose, which is the masses, right? Progress means that we are increasing the well-being of the masses, and that is absolutely true. But how do we get there? How do we get to the trickle down to the vendor? It has to do with the distribution. It's how the society politically is organized and all of that, right? So the benefit to the vendor is not just, and getting to the masses, it's not just about entrepreneurs and business. It's about the politics of the country as well, right? This is what drives the production being shared fairly equitably throughout the society. This is an important issue being raised. So I'm trying to synthesize because I'm not going to repeat. The next thing, another point was raised with respect to technology. Well, this is a very big issue. This is not a simple issue. In general, advanced economies do have more sophisticated technology. But you do have some very poor countries in terms of average income with fairly sophisticated economy. If everything goes well, by September 7, India, per capita income of 1,400 US, right? Guyana's per capita income is like 4,300 US. Guyana has a higher per capita income than India. Well, in a few days, if everything goes right, India will land a spacecraft on the moon, right? So you have what is the point I'm trying to make? This technology issue that Dr. Rose raises is important but a complicated one, because before the process towards economic development, how do we get all these things that people are talking about? Well, one of the basic ingredients is to have technological growth or technological improvement in the society. And where this technology comes from, well, this is we'll take a few shows to answer that question, right? But one of the words was mentioned here tonight by Salim. It's about entrepreneurs in a Schumpeterian process. Schumpeterian process drives technological change. But it's not only the entrepreneur that drives technology. Most of the basic research and sciences that get done in society are supposed to come from government. The problem is that no government in Guyana, going back to independence and before, has ever fully understood this point, right? How do you create the kind of basic research, right? Now you have at UG there, you have a union and you have an administration. All they're doing is fighting and protesting. The union at UG only protests. That's all they do, right? So I don't care who is angry right now, but this is all the unions do. They protest. You have people writing newspaper columns, being radical and all kinds of stuff. They're protesting. But UG is supposed to be one of the basic ingredients to get that technological change. Because as I said, technology and technological progress don't only come from entrepreneurs, it comes from the state or the government as well. Funding the basic science, funding the basic research, right? And this is why India started a space agency. The founder had put it beautifully. We want to have a space agency, not because we can compete with the United States and Soviet Union, but because certain basic spillovers will come about to the society when you have a space program. And last year, we saw this playing out fully. The vision to create a space agency decades ago saved thousands of lives last year, because the Indian prediction satellite system is so good now that they can predict major storms and they can get people out of the way early, right? So that's a classic case where technology is enhanced or saved lives, right? So it's a very complicated issue. I don't want to we can't get into it. I'll be honest with you. I mean, when you study economic growth and development, you have to talk about technology. right? So I'll stop there.
Excellent, guys. So far, you guys have done a really great job. What we'll do now, we have to pay our bills. So when we come back, we want to talk about, I know, Salim, in 2015, you had this economic business forum here in New York. Someone had asked a question: the business community and the private sector is the major barrier to economic development in Guyana. That was from Shamad. And I know some of the postings are on screen. When we come back, we want to discuss how can Guyana now, what are some of the things that we can do in Guyana to launch our people forward for economic development. So we will now go to our ads. We have some bills to pay. So we have Bumdat Sugrim and Associate LLC, certified public accountants here in New York. We prepare personal taxes, business, partnership, not-for-profit, estate and trust, accounting and payroll. We're also the agent for the IRS. For those who are here who need a tax ID number, for instance, come to us, bring your documents. We will verify the authenticity of it and send the application in for your tax ID. We have two offices, one at 20507 Hillside Avenue, and the other one is at 13501 Linden Boulevard. Call us on 929-460-5043. And then our friend from Supreme Quality Carpet, Steve, he's celebrating his 20th anniversary, and there's a big sale going on. He wants to thank all his customers for their loyal service. Steve has been very professional in these 20 years. He do regular residence, he do business, he do whatever it is your need is, he get it done. They're very professional. Call Steve at 718-206-9701 or in his cell at 917-669-2593. Steve is at 17611 Jamaica Avenue here in New York. So thank you, sponsors, for doing this for us. And we look forward, for those of you who are watching, you have a business. GlobeSpan has been trying to expand these broadcasts daily, but it can only happen if, for those of you who have business, if you can place ads with the studio, there's a lot of expense involved. And we're asking you to please subscribe to some ads. Gentlemen, let us segue now into Guyana. And Salim, as I said, in 2016, you were the coordinator of a business forum here in New York, and you were so busy getting the ministers of the government and the business community here excited about progress in Guyana. What has happened?
Well, thanks for bringing that up, and I almost forgot. It was 2016. The
I got a long memory.
AFC administration was brand new. There was a lot of energy in Guyana and outside of Guyana. A lot of excitement to build Guyana. Everybody putting their shoulder to the wheel, and I must say, all of us, including myself and so many others, had so much expectation from the administration. Then, of course, I was also part of the campaign for the AFC in 2011. I was also part of the campaign in 2015 and so on. And after they won, I thought, you win an election, you got a new government, you've got to find ways of now, building and looking at your manifesto and kind of implementing some of them. And for me, and I think the administration at that time, they were campaigning heavily on economic development and economic changes. So one thing I proposed to the team was, let's do a Guyana investment conference in New York City. A very high-level sort of conference, bring about 200 people together, investors primarily, and see what we can get out of them. And we did it from a New York perspective. We were able to get the sponsorships and so on. Then, of course, the big partnership in Guyana was Go Invest, and Go Invest was going to come, present, and so on. And it was good. We had more than 250. We oversold the conference. Total capital in the room was more than $5 billion, excluding Exxon and so on. But there was a lot of money there from various sectors, whether it was agriculture, whether it was manufacturing, whether it was technology, whether it was education. There was a variety of businesses they were looking to go to Guyana and grow. What happened, and again, I'm looking back, I'm not surprised anymore. With all of that we did, and so much money we spent, and so much energy that we created, all of that was passed on to Go Invest, for them to follow up and get these guys to come to Guyana and open their investments. Of course, none of it happened, and it's an unfortunate tragedy that we've spent so much money and Go Invest just dropped the ball. They decided for whatever reason that this was not important to them, and funny enough, that's their core business, investment, Guyana Office of Investment. So I think, and come back to your question, what do we need in Guyana to bring about this sort of economic change that it badly needs? It's got to start with a vision. Go Invest certainly does not have a vision. If they had a vision, they would have seen that $5 billion sitting in that room, and I need to hire 10 more people. I need to look at my systems and processes. I need to look at the red tapes throughout Guyana. I need to find ways of talking, communicating, bringing, a white glove service for these investors. So none of that happened, and it's not only a vision that Go Invest needs. I think vision from the top. Guyana is not going to go forward without a vision, and we could see clearly that our leaders, and even, sadly enough, even some of our business community, they lack the kind of vision that is needed to move Guyana to where it should have been by now. And I think leadership vision has to be followed by leadership, and I think you've got to have some very strategic sort of activities happening in Guyana to ensure that you can have economic progress. I've been listening to a lot of these shows, and I've been listening to a lot of the smaller parties, and many of them, when asked, what's your plan, what's your goal, what's your economic policy, they all say the same thing, that the PPP and the PNC have been fighting each other, so we need something new. That's not going to cut it. I think we've got to move away from the PPP did this and the PNC did that, and we got to move to the next level to say that Guyana needs a GDP maybe of 12 billion or 15 billion. Guyana needs more better educated people. Guyana needs a bigger population. Guyana needs to look at its more than $20-30 billion that's sitting in the diaspora. How can we remigrate that money back into Guyana? So there's a lot of things that needs to be done, but I think it starts with a vision. No one in Guyana so far has been able to articulate a vision for the vendor in Linden or the vendor in Port Morant, or to myself or to anyone on this panel. We have not seen anyone who can really articulate a vision. And to me, without a vision, all the busyness will just fizzle, and we will be having these conversations over and over and over again.
That's very good, Saleh. But look at this. Peter Degar in the 60s, he had a highway to happiness. That was a great vision. Nobody implemented it. But Colin, let me go to you. Kavendra asked a question.
Well, I did say to couple a good vision, you got to have a leader,
That's correct.
And I think he might have had the vision, but he did not, get the leader to walk with him.
To do that, right. Colin, the question was, and this is the panelist, how can Guyana achieve true economic development considering its present situation? And how do you see Guyana getting in the next 5 years? What need to happen for economic development?
I think this is a very good question. I also remember one of our good friends, Rajendra of the Cesar, just posted about, and I wrote this down, bridging the gap between the rich and the poor. I think oftentimes in economic development, we have to think about how do we bridge that gap between the rich and the poor. As Salim and Taran is saying here, how does the vendor in Guyana and in Linden, the vendor gets a fair share? How does the teacher get a fair share? How does the sweeper get a fair share? How does a nurse get a fair share? Well, I think three things have to happen. The first of all is we talked about institutionalization. So in order to foster economic development, we need to strengthen our institutions. And at the core of institutions, what they do a very good job at training and education. You know, teaching people skills, teaching them how to be able to do things, help them to learn, and also there needs to be a continuum of how that learning happens. Essentially, what countries like Guyana, for economic development, we have to move from just being an agricultural base and coming from a town where we boast a lot of agricultural products. And over the last years, maybe last 50 years, we've seen in Guyana, we've all produced rice, sugar, we have bauxite, gold, diamonds, everything, seafood, you name it. But it seems that there is no effort being made for us to, make to sweets, or for us to make, paddy oil is one of the most expensive things. The coconut industry in 2013 made 5 million US dollars, the biggest it's ever made. Never recovered that back again. How do we move that forward? So I believe that the way to success for Guyana is manufacturing. And we oftentimes look at the Singapore model because Singapore, just like Guyana, started out, nearly about 50 years ago. And unfortunately, they're moons ahead of us in terms of development and economic development, and income per capita. So like I said, when I think about economic development, I'm thinking about putting money in the pockets of the vendors, the teachers, and so forth. And I have a plan. So my plan is, in order to stimulate our economy, I think we need to reduce our income tax threshold. I think the average Guyanese it's too much a burdensome to pay about 30% income tax. So I'd like to reduce that, a plan to reduce it between 30% and in time to come even at 15%. Another thing is, Salim and us, we were on the investment forum, and we had a lot of companies coming in, but companies cannot be attracted to Guyana with a high corporate tax rate. So we have to reduce our corporate tax rate, take it down to about 15%, where people can now bring in machinery, employ more people, diversify our economy, bring in more companies. I think with the advent of the oil industry and all the spin-offs we're going to get, this is the best time to grow business, to make it more progressive. We in Guyana and the Caribbean, we have some of the highest corporate tax rates. It's not progressive. It's not creating growth for jobs. It's not creating growth for businesses. So I would like to see that being decreased along with the income tax threshold. I want to see the average Guyanese person not paying taxes until it gets to over $100,000. I believe in order to achieve happiness in Guyana, the average Guyanese must be making between 100 and 150,000. And I know many people will say that these are ambitious plans and they cannot be achieved. And the biggest question most people will ask is how we're going to pay for it. Well, we're going to pay for it because we have a great resource that's going to be taking our economy 3 times as much, which is oil. So from the revenues from oil, we can use this as a shortfall to make up for the corporate and income tax and the threshold rates. And also, I believe that when you create an environment that is progressive, when you lower taxes and you grow businesses, the economy will grow. Also, taxes will grow. Now, the other thing with VAT, people say that's something that is kind of strangling development in Guyana a bit. I'd like to see VAT go down to about 8%, so that people can think about the mother tonight who wants to buy milk for her kids, or the farmer who wants to buy pesticides. We have all of these we have all these hindrances around the taxes, bringing in things into ports. I think that there should be a flat tax when it comes to our duty taxes at the customs. Put it about 10 or 15%. So what I'd like to see here is a plan that will grow the economy, that will enhance true development, that is manufacturer based, that focuses on training people, developing them, and totally contributing to the well being and the happiness for Guyana.
You know, listening before I bring in Taran, listening to you guys, I'm wondering, what are you guys doing in the United States of America? You should be back home helping our country in its economic development. It really bothers the hell out of me that you guys, such brilliant presentation, such brilliant ideas, and we are giving up to Uncle Sam and not develop our country. I know
Charles, you asked the wrong people what we're doing here.
I know. Rajendra Bisesar been asking a couple of questions, and it's not Raj, we're not answering your question. But Taran, as an economist, if you become the next finance minister, what will be short-term goals, medium-term goals, and long-term goals for economic development, and at the same time enhancing the welfare of the people in Guyana?
Well, I think let's not get into those hypotheticals. I think there are several things that have been said, and Raj did ask, I think, what is a very interesting, several questions, and one of which is this whole issue of technology, whether technology will displace labor or worker. Well, I think what Ginger is getting at is it's a misunderstanding of what technology means to an economist, or from the way we look at technology. And all the research has shown that going back to the technological advancements of the last 100 years, whether it's the light bulb or the ideas that go into the electricity, setting up the grid system, building these airports and all these things, the radio, the television, all these things lead to new professions, careers that never existed, right? So I don't think it is correct to say that technology displaces labor. As a matter of fact, the evidence so far has shown that technology creates more opportunities for labor. However, I think Raj is pointing out something that's important, and that is the technologies of the last 15 years, the internet-based technologies, do not require an intense labor force like before. And the verdict is still out on this, right? And there's a lot of speculation about robotics and so on, self-driving vehicles. These things are very far away. So it's technology in general, and other research have shown this, do lead to more opportunities for labor and lead to greater labor productivity, and greater labor productivity will increase pay and wages. But going back to the point that Salim made about his frustrations with the Business Council, you see, I don't think you guys fully appreciate how business is run in Guyana. Salim, the reason Go Invest is not incompetent, Bar Jagdeo is not incompetent, David Granger is not incompetent. This is the way business is done in Guyana. Bar Jagdeo has a group of people that he wants to do business. David Granger has a group of people that he wants to have success in business, right? And to a large extent, there is an ethnic side to this whole issue, this whole who should do business in Guyana. So when you are observing frustrations that Go Invest is appearing as though he's not interested, you see, Go Invest has to go back to the political bosses who first determine who gets to invest, right? So this is how the thing is done. All the frustrations. Now, why you raise the issue of the diaspora? Everybody keeps saying diaspora. Well, look at the evidence. There's a huge, in general, the population in general. There is an anti-diaspora dimension to the population in general. But the people from the diaspora, who the politicians bring in, are within their ethnic networks and their friend networks, right? Mm-hmm. So this is how it works. So if you want to do something, and I'm not interested in Minister John, I should make that clear, right? So that's why I'm not taking your question thing, because I don't want anybody to be saying rumors. I'm really just, you shouldn't have asked that question. That's why I'm going on in this direction.
Okay.
Because
All right. Let me stop
no,
you
no,
this.
no, no. It's a very important thing, because when you see what appears to be incompetence, it's not incompetence. These guys, Barrett and Granger and all these people are smart people, but they want their people to do business, not the other people. Of course, they have to, for politics and for show and for tokenism, allow a certain number of people from the outside to do business, right? So this is really how it works. And the diaspora is not ever going to get involved in that. And the main reasons, but one of the key reasons is because the political class will only get diaspora people within their ethnic networks and within their friend networks. That's how it works. So when Granger won the election, there were mainly elderly army, ex-army people who were brought in, right? That's how the thing works. So we've got to understand.
I want to ask you if that is the case, and in that position where the PPP is for themselves and the PNC is for themselves, and therefore it's a hindrance for economic development. And come back to the question: how do we ever get out of this? Are we ever going to get out of it?
Well, I mean, I think there has to be a political solution. I mean, we keep talking about all these economic stuff. You have to have, yes, the economics is very important, but we also need an economic, political solution. And one of which, many people have written on this going back to the 80s and earlier, we've got to find a way to reform the electoral system, reform the constitution, reform the parliament, create space for third parties to compete, create a more competitive political system. We have to make sure members of parliament, right, are directly elected by people, right? We're talking about progress and freedom. This is what it means to be free. Why should a leader determine who should be on his or her list? The list system, right? The list system needs to go. So all these things are related. I know Raj is asking question about technology and all these things, but all these things are intricately related: the politics, the economics, the sociology.
All right, Darren,
science. Yes.
I'm glad you're elaborating, but I know our time is coming to an end. Actually, we only have a couple of minutes more. But quickly, if you guys can tell us forget about being minister now. I didn't mean that in the way you look at it, but if you are asked to, in your own recommendation, maybe you can start with Salim.
I'm not interested in going back to Guyana either way. I just want people to be clear that
okay.
I have no interest in moving back to Guyana.
In terms of,
I will.
That's fine. But in terms of the recommendation for short-term, medium-term, long-term, give us two concrete proposals, Salim, for medium-term, and long-term, and in the immediate future. What you will recommend to a government?
Well, like Taran said, and like I've been involved in for quite a while, I think the Guyana hairball is very, very difficult to unravel, and it does start with the politics of the day. But let's just assume that politics was not a hindrance for economic development. Let's assume that government and have a strategy and they have whatever it is, and they're not standing in the way of business and the economy. I would say that they're missing things we can do. There are four of us on this panel, and all of us live in the United States. I need to see more Guyanese articulating about this, about Guyana and its economy and its government. I think when you speak to Guyanese, they're either in the PNC or the PUP camp. I think we need to move away from that. But in terms of what tangible I can offer, I think if the next government should have a Ministry of Economic Development, fundamentally, that looks at the nation's happiness, as Basdev Pandey said in the opening, and say, what do we need to do to deliver happiness? What do I need to do to bring about happiness to the people, to the students, to teachers, to policemen, families, everyone else, and I think starting fundamentally saying that we need a Ministry of Economic Development and / everything else what that economic development means. I think for sure, Go Invest needs to be totally revamped, even scrapped, and start an agency that looks at the key sectors in Guyana and develop a strategy for each sector. Of course, you've got oil, but I think you've got some tremendous amount of potentials in other areas. Colin talked about coconut. You're talking about so many other agriculture and manufacturing that can be done in Guyana. So we need to look at maybe the top 10, 15 sectors that needs urgent attention. Thirdly, I think what I would do, I would invest in people. Guyana has a people problem, not only in terms of numbers, yes, that's a problem, but also in terms of their skill level and educational level. I think the whole educational system needs to relook at the people that we need to move things forward. I know we all talk about other countries that are very developed, but they spend a lot of their money on their people, not only per se education in the classroom, but their communities and their other things that needs to be done to keep them happy and to keep them mentally active. So I think investing in our people, getting a ministry, looking at the key sectors, and having a robust plan for each one of them, and have them go that way. But as Taryn says, politics in Guyana is the stumbling block for everything else. So we've got to fix that as urgently as possible. I'm not too sure if it is fixable. We're right now in a big uproar about constitution and no confidence and election and so on. So I think we are probably going to be going through another cycle of political confusion that will lead to a lot more economic underdevelopment.
Thank you, Salim. I know we really run out of time. Colin, what will be some short recommendation for the immediate, medium, and long term for a new Guyana?
I think the future of Guyana lies in our young people. And not because I'm young, I'm saying this, but I believe that when you have a population with 60% under 40 years old, there's really scope for a lot of growth, development. There's a scope for a lot of innovation. We've been talking about technology. We've been talking about cellular phones, how social media has transformed Guyana. I think these are all great things that we can also use to push the development agenda. Going back to my plan, I believe that in order for Guyana to develop, we need to reduce our taxes. We need to create an environment where businesses can thrive, where the average farmer, the average vendor, the average janitor, the average teacher, nurse, policeman, fire officer can thrive, can have wages, that can go to the market and buy goods, that can take their kids on vacations, that can enjoy a decent life. I think that our politics has to be a politics that is focused on optimism and growth. I think too much our politics has been enraged in cynicism. It's enraged in negative back and forth. Who has done what and who's done what? Our young people, we don't care about, and most of us have not even lived in the PNC era. We've not even lived in the PPP era for most of us. So we would like to see a Guyana where growth and development can be a reality, where money can flow in our pockets. We can have access to quality healthcare that is delivered to us in all regions. You can go to any hospital from Madia to Latem, and you can get treated kindly, fairly, an education system that promotes free thought, free idea, outward thinking. I think these are all progressive things. I think a progressive Guyana, a forward move in Guyana is the way forward. And it has to start with our leaders and our politics in
Thank
that
you very
regard.
much, gentlemen. Time is running. We have come to the end of our time. The thing is, when you're having fun, time really go by fast. But gentlemen, I want to thank you so much for your contribution tonight. Viewers, I want to thank you so much. There's so many comments that were made. We were not able to go through them, but I think they were really great comments. To our panelists, I look forward to have you in the future again. You've been remarkable, and I really look forward to your contribution again. Now, from next week, the program will not be at 8 o'clock, but we'll start earlier. We'll start like 4 o'clock. So we'll inform all our viewers about that. So please tune in next week. And we want to thank again GlobeSpan 24/7, Noir Singh. We want to thank our technical specialist, Devin. They've done a wonderful job for us. And of course, to our viewers and to our panelists this evening, I want to thank you guys so much. And here from New York, good night and God bless you.
Thank you, Charles.
Thanks.